the 2023 annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group with the theme, Mobilizing Private Sector Financing for Climate and Green Growth in Africa. I wish to start by thanking His Excellency President Al-Sisi, my very dear big brother and also friend, for hosting so generously the 2023 annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. I applaud and I am grateful, Your Excellency, for the excellent support of the government of Egypt in preparing for these annual meetings. Thank you very much, sir. A special welcome to you, the heads of state and government, for being here for these annual meetings. Thank you for honoring our invitation. Your presence in such large numbers is a testament of the great friendship you have, of course, with Egypt and the support that you have always been given to the African Development Bank. A special welcome to President Asali Assoumani of the Union of Comoros and the chairperson of the African Union, chairman of the African Union, and President Emmerson Mnangagwa of the Republic of Zimbabwe. We are delighted as well to be joined by Vice President Philip Mpango of the United Republic of Tanzania, Prime Minister Hamza Barre of the Federal Republic of Somalia, Prime Minister Edward Ingirente of the Republic of Rwanda, Prime Minister Gervais Indira Kubuka of the Republic of Burundi, and my dear big brother, His Excellency, former President Joaquim Chissano, the former President of the Republic of Mozambique. A special welcome to you, my dear brother, Your Excellency Mustafa Faki, the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Thank you for your strong partnership with the African Development Bank and for your support. Thank you very much for all we do together. I'd like to give a warm welcome to all our governors of the bank, honorable ministers, and all participants to these annual meetings. We are particularly delighted to have two special guests, His Excellency Omar Kabaj, the former president of the African Development Bank Group, and His Excellency Dr. Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber, UAE Special Envoy for Climate and COP28 President-designate. And just so that you know, I was talking to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, my dear brother, and he was telling me he can't wait to turn off this to you for COP28. So let's give it up to the Minister Shukri of the Arab Republic of Egypt. He did a fantastic job globally for us on COP27, and we are going to COP28. Thank you very much, brother. Of course, a very special welcome to my own loving and darling wife, Grace. Thanks, honey, for being here. You are my greatest supporter. Welcome to the beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh, a modern city being managed exceptionally well. The governor of South Sinai, Major General retired Khaled Fouda, and his team are doing an incredible job, making Egypt and Africa very proud. And Your Excellency, Mr. President, you should be very proud of them. I came to this place, I saw them, the way they pay attention to detail. It should make you proud. It makes us proud. Thank you very much. Sharm el-Sheikh brings back some great memories for us. It was right here that the world met for COP27, the place where the world again renewed its commitment to keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It was right here, under the excellent leadership of President Al-Sisi, that the world made the historic decision on loss and damage on climate change. Loss and damage? Yes. African countries, which accounted for only 3% of the cumulative carbon emissions globally, now suffer disproportionately from its negative consequences. Right here in Egypt, water security has become a national issue. At COP27, Egypt launched the Nexus on Water, Food, and Energy, a very bold effort to mobilize $14 billion to tackle the effects of climate change. The African Development Bank is leading this effort to mobilize $1.4 billion to support desalination and water treatment plants for agriculture. Your Excellency, Mr. President, I'm delighted to let you know today that we have actually exceeded that target. With all our partners, we've mobilized $2.2 billion from development partners to advance your mission on this. Across the Sahel, hotter climate is drying up water basins. The Lake Chad Basin, which used to support livelihoods of millions of people in Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, has shrunk to 1/10 of its size. In several parts of the Horn of Africa, rains have not fallen for over 4 seasons. And in Malawi, Mozambique, Madagascar, Zambia, and Rwanda, cyclones and floods have left devastation in their wake. For the loss of lives and destruction of a lot of infrastructure, and for the small island states are buffeted by rising sea levels, coastal erosion, of course, significant losses. Whichever way you look at it, Africa is being devastated by climate change. It loses $7 to $15 billion a year due to climate change, which is projected to rise to $50 billion by 2030. Finding the financial resources to tackle climate change is increasingly difficult for African countries that are still reeling from the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, now exacerbated by climate change, debt, and inflation arising from the mixture of global geopolitical conflicts and the high global inflationary trends. Africa's cumulative climate financing needs are estimated at $2.7 trillion between 2020 and 2030. Climate adaptation costs are estimated between $249 to $407 billion over the same period. Yet, climate financing resources are only flowing to Africa in trickles. As the continent receives only a mere 3% of global climate finance, of which 14% is from the private sector, the lowest, I must say, in the world. So there's much to do to leverage private sector into climate finance and green growth. Your bank, the African Development Bank, is playing its part. We have exceeded our commitment to provide 40% of our total financing to climate, reaching 45% in 2022. We committed 63% of our total climate finance to adaptation, exceeding the global target of 50%. And in the bank, the praise from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the United Nations General Assembly as a global leader on climate adaptation. I think we should clap for the African Development Bank. And we'll continue to do more. To do more, we launched the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, to mobilize $25 billion for climate adaptation. Now, while developed countries must meet their commitments to provide $100 billion annually to developing countries for climate finance, this is still, even though a good gesture, minuscule compared to financing needs. Public climate financing must be complemented by mobilization of resources from the private sector. To mobilize more private sector climate financing for Africa, we launched the African Financial Alliance for Climate to bring together all financial institutions, stock exchanges in Africa, to green the financial ecosystem. Financial institutions should incorporate climate financing into all their operations. The valuation of companies on the stock exchanges based on the greening of their portfolios will provide greater incentives for green investment across Africa. The use of green bonds can mobilize global green finance into Africa. And that is because Africa currently accounts for just 0.2% of the $2.2 trillion of cumulative green bonds issued up to 2022. The African Development Bank has issued more than $10 billion of green and social bonds in the past 10 years. It has allowed us to support green projects, such as the Kabeoluka wind farm in Cabo Verde, which supplies about 20% of its electricity. And right here in Egypt, the Gabal El Asfar water treatment plant, which supplies water for over 3.3 million people, one of the 10 largest water treatment plants in the world. And when I came here to see His Excellency President al-Sisi, and I mentioned this to him, he said to me, look, we are working on probably about 3 or 4 other water treatment plants. And it happens to be even bigger than what I've just said today. And I'm quite pleased that right here in Egypt, Mr. President, you take bold decisions, and one thing that I admire about you, make them happen very fast and at scale. I think by the time you look at all of what is being done, it's amazing that how fast change can happen. Thank you, sir. We are using the private sector to transfer to the market the climate risks facing countries by insuring countries against climatic shocks. The Africa Disaster Risk Financing Program, which is being implemented in partnership with the African Risk Capacity, now supports African countries in managing risks of climate disasters through risk profiling, contingency planning, and disaster risk financing. Your Excellencies, it is working and working very well. 3 years ago, when Madagascar suffered from droughts, the program disbursed $2.1 billion to support losses suffered by 600,000 vulnerable people. Similarly, when Malawi experienced droughts, the insurance program unlocked $14.2 billion of payout to farmers. The bank is now working to deepen the development of reinsurance markets to expand the capacity of the private sector on market risk transfers. Your Excellencies, we must do more to green the infrastructure space of Africa through private sector financing. And that's why the African Development Bank, Africa 50, and partners launched the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, which we call AGIA. It will accelerate private sector investments in renewable energy, green urban infrastructure systems, green hydrogen, and climate-resilient infrastructure. AGIA hopes to mobilize $500 million of project preparation and project development financing using private equity platforms, and to mobilize $10 billion of private sector financing for green infrastructure in Africa. The African Development Bank is also using blended financing to accelerate private investments in electricity. We are implementing, with public and private sectors, a $20 billion desert-to-power program to develop 10,000 megawatts of electricity using solar in the Sahel and provide electricity for 250 million people. And when it is done, it's going to be the largest solar zone in the world. And Mr. President, we are particularly also pleased as a bank to have been part of supporting you for the Ben Band project that you have here, which is also a great solar program. The bank is deploying private partial credit guarantees to support the mobilization of private financing. A good example is our recent provision of €195 million as partial credit guarantee to support the Republic of Benin to raise $500 million on global capital markets. And last week, our board of directors approved a $345 million partial credit guarantee to support Egypt to raise $500 million in private financing for green growth through its issuance of its first ever sustainability Panda backbone, which I must say is also the first in Africa. As the world moves to transition to electric cars and vehicles, Africa, Your Excellencies, stands to be able to attract billions of dollars in private investment for greening global transport systems. That's because Africa has 80% of the global deposits of platinum, 50% of the global deposit of cobalt, 40% of nickel, and substantial deposits of lithium. Africa must not make the same mistakes of the past. Africa must set itself up to manufacture lithium-ion batteries to tap into the future markets of electric vehicles that some projections estimate will run into several trillions of dollars in future. And I must say here that the cost of establishing a lithium-ion precursor factory in Africa is 3 times less expensive than in China and 3 times less expensive than in the United States. The future before us is full of challenges on climate change, no doubt. But it also has and holds massive opportunities on green growth for our economies. To mobilize a lot more private financing for climate change and green growth, governments and development partners should take 5 approaches. First, establish national development plans for green transition for their economies. Second, subsidize green industries to spur growth, raise demand, profitability, and sustainability. Third, multilateral and bilateral financial institutions should provide guarantees at scale to help de-risk investments by the private sector. Fourth, support should be provided for the preparation and development of bankable projects that can provide high risk-adjusted returns to the private sector. And fifth, existing public finance infrastructure should be transferred to the private sector, what we are collectively calling, working with Africa 50, asset recycling, to mobilize more private sector resources for greener infrastructure. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the next 3 days of these annual meetings, we will discuss and explore these and other big ideas as we move to climate-proof Africa and boost green growth. The future of Africa is green. Our sun, wind, geothermal, and water should power our continent. Our infrastructure should be green and greener. Our economies must be climate-proofed and resilient. Let's unleash the power of the private sector for a greener Africa. Welcome once again. Thank you very much. Shukran.